I'm good, man. How are you doing?
Can't complain. Well, we've got sunny weather, so I've had to put the t-shirt on, which is always good.
Yeah.
It's been a mixed bag of a summer, really, hasn't it?
Yeah, you know what? I complain when it's too cold and I complain when it's too hot. It's just never quite right, is it? But that's the beauty of the UK. I just came from a holiday in Dartmoor National Park where it has like almost like a microclimate there, and it was chilly and rainy, and then the sun came out and you appreciated it. But I'm almost hoping for rain. I think there's going to be a thunderstorm either later tonight or tomorrow. So
It's meant to be
fingers crossed.
It's meant to be raining this weekend, so
Great.
perfect
Bring
time.
it on. I can't handle this heat, even though I'm from LA. You'd think that I could, but that's a dry heat versus this, which is very oppressive and muggy.
I remember when I lived in London, and I always used to dread this time of year having to get on the tube. It was just like,
Oh, that's the worst. I'm glad I'm not taking public transport at the moment.
yeah.
But yeah, walking or cycling everywhere right now is the ideal mode of transport.
Alrighty, let's kick this off. For those who haven't listened to the first episode yet, you should.
Yep.
Doing things a little differently here, in that we're not speaking to you as somebody who's successful, great, fantastic. You too can do this. We're talking to you from a perspective of we're going through this ride. We're different parts of the journey, sharing our knowledge and experience and being as transparent as possible with you. So if you enjoy. I got some questions for you from the last episode, actually, I wanted to follow up on before we got started.
Yeah.
The first episode was about what got us into kombucha, etc., leading up to making the decision to go commercial. And this episode, we're going to talk about from that point onwards to sort of to where we are now. So in the last episode, Adam, you mentioned that you received your first SCOBY from Kombucha Mama in LA.
I did.
Yes.
Yeah, from Hannah Crum.
Yeah. Is this the SCOBY you brought with you? And was it the SCOBY that started off Jarr Kombucha?
I wish I could say that is the case, but it's not. I left that SCOBY in Los Angeles before coming to London because I didn't know if it was legal to transport a living culture of bacteria and yeast on a flight, whether it would survive. And secondly, if I got held up at customs, what they would say. Yeah. So
could you imagine?
I know, sorry, go ahead.
Can you imagine the customs officer's expression when he saw a pellicle on a floating water kind of thing?
I'm sure people have done it before, but that would be a weird conversation to have. But the original SCOBY for Jarr in the UK was from happykombucha.co.uk, and Happy Kombucha still to this day sells organically certified and produced really hardy SCOBYs, as well as loads of like fermentation equipment. So we always recommend that people head there if they're looking to start a home brew for the first time, or even looking to purchase commercial volumes of SCOBYs. I think at one point we spent like 700 pounds with them and just bought all the SCOBYs they had. And that's sort of how we started growing our culture. And then at one point we realized that we needed a top up. We needed some starter liquid. So at that time, Gary from Go Kombucha was selling his starter liquid, which was really potent, really bacteria rich, really tangy and delicious on his website. And we bought, again, like 500 pounds worth of his starter liquid and used that to kickstart our ferment. So it was a combination of Go Kombucha, their starter liquid, and Happy Kombucha's SCOBY. Yeah, just a shout out. I gave him a shout out on the last episode, but Gary's the pioneer of kombucha in the UK, and he makes some of the best kombucha I've ever tried, particularly his China White, which is amazing. You can get it in a champagne bottle. It's like Prosecco. It's really delicious. So thank you, Gary, for paving the way for everyone. And thank you for your starter liquid.
I'm going to make a note to get some of this kombucha.
Yeah, it's great. It's really, really good. And it's like really reasonably priced. It's excellent kombucha and great as an alcohol alternative as well. But I'm actually curious as well about you. You mentioned before that you got your SCOBY, you think, from Norway. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's a lady in Norway, can't remember the name off the top of my head, is Jun. So, and she's very traditional about it all. So picked it up got some from her, tried it. Got me over at home, and so it was love at first sight. I think now you can get it from, there is a place in the UK who does sell Jun SCOBY, something like naturally fermented or something, and also sell kombucha SCOBYs and Hawaiian SCOBY, Himalayan SCOBY, and all this sort of stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, so these different type of, so it'd be kombucha, but a kombucha that's being fed on, I don't know, like maybe just rooibos tea or something. So it does have different color, etc. So it's quite fascinating to have a look at their website. But
That's really interesting. Awesome.
freshly fermented, I think it is.
Oh, freshly fermented. Okay, cool.
So I think they also do Jun scobies now as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've also talked a bit about how the Jun SCOBY is slightly different from the kombucha SCOBY in that it contains different types of yeast, so it can consume the fructose and the honey more efficiently, whereas a kombucha ferment is largely the yeast consumes the sucrose and the sugar and then breaks that down into fructose and glucose. And that's probably why a Jun ferment is a little bit quicker than a kombucha ferment, because it doesn't have to go through that initial stage of breaking down the sucrose into the fructose. It's sort of already consuming the fructose. I don't know, maybe that's one of the reasons why it's faster.
I would love to know. If you find out, let me know. It's one of those things where, you've only got so much time in the day, but actually it'd be probably a good point now to just quickly tell people how you make kombucha.
Oh yeah. So yeah, if you're tuning in, you haven't tried kombucha before or don't know much about it, kombucha is fermented tea by definition, and it's classically brewed, originally brewed with only 4 ingredients, and that's tea, water, sugar, and a SCOBY. That's all you need. And you need some, reasonably warm temperatures, ideally above 18 to 20 degrees. And a nice airy space to brew, as well as a jar, a stirring utensil, and some patience, because it's not the easiest thing to brew or take care of or to nurture. I like to liken the idea of making kombucha to taking care of a plant. It's sort of like watering a plant and nurturing it and giving it enough sunlight and allowing it the space to do its thing, because kombucha is a living, breathing organism, at least the SCOBY is, the bacteria and yeast. And so giving that the space and the proper nourishment is key to creating a good tasting and healthy ferment.
Yeah. When you say it's living, do you want to just elaborate just a little bit on that? So because we don't want people to think it's like a Frankenstein or something.
Well, some people believe that the SCOBY is conscious. I don't know anything about that, but it's a makeup of bacteria and yeast. So kombucha is largely made up of, generally speaking, 2 dominant strains of bacteria, which are Acetobacter and Gluconobacter. Acetobacter creates acetic acid, Gluconobacter creates gluconic acid, which are the 2 predominant acids that you find in a kombucha ferment, which is why it's so sour. You can also find things like lactobacillus and other things like that, but that's less common and more found in things like water kefir. And the yeast can vary from Saccharomyces to Brettanomyces, things that you might find in a beer brew, actually. And it's the combination of the bacteria and yeast which work to consume the sucrose and the sugar, break that down into fructose and glucose, which is then subsequently broken down by the bacteria into beneficial acids. And that's sort of the process by which kombucha is made. But those organisms are surviving, the yeast off of the sugar, the bacteria off of the broken down sugar, to make this drink what it is.
How long does it take from first, steeping the tea, adding the sugar, etc.? How long would you think, on average, it would take to do it before you can, from that first stage, to be able to drink it?
It depends how you like your kombucha and what temperature you're fermenting at, how strong your SCOBY is, the quantity of sugar you use. There's so many different factors, but let's say on average, you're fermenting at 24 degrees with 50 grams of sugar per liter, and you have a decent SCOBY or starter liquid. It should take you anywhere between 7 to 14 days. Roughly speaking, some kombucha brands choose to ferment for 30 days for a softer, less acidic, more rounded flavor. Some for 7 days at a high temperature, which creates a very acidic, somewhat yeasty, often alcoholic brew. So you do want to find the optimal temperature and time for you. And it also depends on whether you're oxygenating, introducing oxygen into the brew. For us, it takes 12 days. And that's for our particular flavor profile. And we've been working between 10 and 12 days for roughly 3 to 4 years now. Initially, it was a little bit longer, and we've refined our methods, and we brew in a slightly different way now, where we control the oxygenation. But the standard ferment on average is about 2 weeks.
From a Jun perspective, and we should also say that this is, when you mention temperatures, we're talking centigrade, not Fahrenheit, just in case.
Yes. That'd be a little cold.
Yeah. So with Jun,
frozen, in fact.
Yeah. Well, I have no idea. What is 24 degrees Fahrenheit and Celsius?
Oh God, I don't know the mechanism for determining that anymore. My brain is all discombobulated from coming from the States to this system. I'm still all over the place. But
Yeah.
with June, it's a slightly quicker ferment. Is that right?
Yeah, so I was going to say, so Jun is basically kombucha. It's just that we'll have a discussion later on, I think, about more detail about what came first, Jun or kombucha. But I think Jun is made raw raw honey and green tea, and you ferment it at the lower end of a kombucha brewing temperature, so around 18 to 20 degrees, and it takes somewhere around 4 to 7 days to complete a fermentation.
That's fast. That's great.
That's really fast. I mean, for us, it takes 5 to 6 days. So we're pretty much in the middle there. We do that to control the alcohol levels as well as to get the right balance of acidity. We don't want to, if we did it at a higher temperature, it would ferment really quickly. So possibly in 3 days, but it would be alcoholic, very yeasty. And if we do it in much less time, there is so a much lower temperature, there's a danger of it actually taking, becoming contaminated with mold, etc. There is an issue around that you got to be careful of when you're fermenting too low a temperature. So so around 18 to 20 degrees is what you want to do. It goes really quickly, and as a result, it has a much lighter flavor profile. It's not as vinegary as kombucha is. That's probably the main differences between them, to be honest.
I absolutely love June, and yours is especially well balanced. It has that vinegary. I don't even know if I'd call it vinegary, but it's like that. It's almost a gluconic kind of tartness, like a really well balanced tartness with the fullness. And the honey gives it a different kind of sweetness that I actually prefer to sugar. And of course, honey is full of nutrition, whereas sugar maybe not so much. So
music to my ears, and and there's so much, but it's so problematic as well, because obviously when you're brewing, you have the wild yeast in the honey as well as in the air. Where with kombucha, you don't have that issue with the sugar. You've only it's just the SCOBY you're kind of managing. But certainly with Jun, and when you want to go commercial, which we can talk about a bit later as well, as like, you want things to be as standard as possible. So if somebody has a can of a drink, they don't want to have a can 2 weeks later and it would taste completely different. So you have to sort of be able to standardize the whole taste profile. So when you're doing Jun, we're measuring the water content of the honey, etc. Because if people have harvested the honey too soon, it'll be over 20%, and therefore it will start to ferment really quickly as well.
Interesting.
And crystallize.
You're using a viscous liquid almost that dried sugar is very easy to measure, and it's exact in its measurements. So I can understand how that might be a little bit more difficult based on seasonal honey production and yield.
I was going to say you would know, been a fan of our honey, the honey we get from our bees. But
I use it every morning in my. I have a cacao every morning, and I put your honey in it. It's amazing. It's the best.
But it's amazing how different, because when people come visit, when we have the honey at the moment, bees are busy making it at the moment. But when if you take honey, depending on what time of year you take the honey, it's amazing how different it tastes. It's like wine. Different times of year, it tastes completely different based on what flowers are out. So hopefully soon, it's been a terrible year for bees, but I won't get into that. But hopefully soon, the bees will be kind enough to give us some honey, and it'll have at this time of year, it's going to start having a real blackberry flower type taste to it, which is amazing. So,
awesome.
I'll let you know when I've got some to send you away.
I'm looking forward to trying that, definitely.
A couple more questions for you, Adam. You said in the last episode, you made the decision to start your business before you had a product. So you came to the UK, wanted to start a business, didn't have a product, knew it was going to be kombucha. So I think that's a recipe for disaster. So I was keen to hear what sort of problems you had, and on reflection, what would you do differently?
Yeah, that's a good point and a great question. We came up with the idea, as I mentioned in the last episode, for Jarr, sat around my kitchen table in Los Angeles, and 2 weeks later I'd booked a flight. I didn't even know how to make kombucha. I'd just been drinking it for many years and I loved it. And then coupled with the knowledge of my friends who ran this craft beer brewery in London, and sort of their understanding of that there was really no market for kombucha on a commercial scale in the UK at the time, we saw an opportunity, but we did not yet have the knowledge to brew kombucha or a product. So we sort of, we thought we can figure this out, with their craft brewing experience. We thought, it's kombucha, it's fermented tea. Surely it can't be that difficult. And then I learned how to brew it, of course, from Hannah Crum, the kombucha mama. And then when I arrived in London, my friends had already been experimenting on some batches. And the problem is that kombucha does not behave exactly as you want it to. You can't control kombucha. You can give it the space to do what you'd sort of like it to do. That's a better way of putting it. And scaling up from 8-liter glass jars, which is what we brewed in for the first 6 months, to large stainless steel tanks does not go down very well with the bacteria and yeast. They get confused. You could even say maybe they get angry because they were happy in their small environment. It was nice and small, and it was easy. And then putting them suddenly in this big tank is confusing, and expecting them to do the same thing they were doing in a small glass jar is a bit reckless, I guess, at times. And we found out the hard way. We lost our first big batch. It went overly yeasty. We were heating when we first invested in these large custom-made stainless steel tanks. We were heating from the bottom of this tank by taping cardboard around the bottom and putting a space heater underneath. And what we now know is that when you heat from underneath, the yeast goes crazy, which increases the alcohol. It increases those sulfuric smells and flavors. So our kombucha was just completely unbalanced and in disarray. And at that point, we invested a lot more money in buying some starter liquid from Go Kombucha and some scobies from Happy Kombucha to sort of reignite the ferment. But what I would recommend to anyone that's thinking of starting a kombucha brand or any fermentation brand in general is get your product before you start the brand, because that's the most important part. If the product doesn't taste good, if it's not consistent, if it's not safe to drink, then you don't really have the brand is only the shell. The product is the core of what you're doing. So I would have done it a different way, but it also taught us the hard way, and we really had to graft and work and develop a real respect for the fermentation process. In retrospect.
Did you, when you were creating your recipes, were you creating the recipes in the glass jar, or were you creating those recipes in the big tanks?
No, in the glass jars. That's how we started. And we started early on experimenting with dozens of different types of tea, different variations: black tea, green tea, white tea, pu'er tea, oolong tea, and then single batches with each of those teas. And we decided that 50% oolong, 50% green tea was the nice balance for us. Black tea was a bit too strong, and if we steeped for slightly too long or at slightly too high of a temperature, it would go bitter very quickly, and that would pass on to the ferment. Oolong and green seemed to be a nice middle ground and a nice base for flavoring. So that was some experimentation we did in small glass jars. And there's some photos on our Instagram of our very first batches. And that was a great way to do it. And I know brands like Momo Kombucha are still fermenting in glass jars, which I think is wonderful. We, at the time, couldn't source loads of glass jars, which is why we ended up investing in fermentation grade stainless steel tanks. And we also didn't think that we could scale up with the space that we had by continuing to add these glass jars. So, but I do think that kombucha fermented in small vessels tastes amazing. You can get as close to a home ferment as possible.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And we probably should just say to people you mentioned the comment about heating from the bottom sends the yeast having a bit of a party, and kombucha, yeast tends to gather at the bottom of a tank. And it likes temperature, while the bacteria gathers near the top, and it doesn't like the temperature so much. That's why if you want more bacteria, kind of lower the temperature, more yeast, you raise the temperature.
Exactly.
So consequently, heating at the bottom, it's like the yeast is having a little hot tub session.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you don't want. You want to minimize the overproduction of yeast and maximize the production of bacteria, because the bacteria is really what does the job and creates those flavors that you want. With you, when you first started brewing, were you brewing in glass jars? and then eventually scaled up to what we see behind you, which are, how many liters are those tanks?
These are our SCOBY tanks, and they're 50 liters each.
Mhm.
And we've got these 150 liter Brewtech tanks. They've all been chosen for a reason. This is our fermentation. When we started, we started with glass jars. It was back then. I was very much about being the purist, wanted everything to be pure, had to be pure, couldn't be pure unless it was in glass and so forth. And problem is when you're sort of doing things on your own, and we'll talk about doing things on your own or doing things in a team, but certainly doing things on your own and having to lift up, much like yourself, getting glass jars is a real pain, and getting them on at a reasonable size is a pain. So we started with, I think, 8-liter Kilner jars. I then made the mistake of saying, right, we're going to scale. I'll move up to 12-liter Kilner jars. That's 50% more scale. That's great. And but you quickly 50% when doesn't actually get you that much when you're scaling. So it only lasts maybe a week or two before you're suddenly outgrowing those needs. Having to carry 12-liter jars full of liquid, 12-14 kilos around, and not wanting to drop them, and then having to clean them once you use them, etc. Just you on your own doing it, it's just a nightmare. And space is a definite constraint for us. So that I had that bench full of jars. I then had shelves with more jars, and it just wasn't manageable. And we spent a lot of time trying to work out how to use stainless steel tanks in a good way. And one of the advantages of these Brewtech ones, which reason we went for that, apart from the space side of things, they're 150 liters, which is good. And because we've got Jun, we can turn them over a lot quicker because it ferments a lot sooner. But these also have temperature controls built in, so we can actually keep it at the exact temperature we want it kept at, regardless of what the ambient temperature is doing. So for us, it's a great way to be more consistent in our brewing. I love glass jars, and but I think most of our glass jars I've now sold to a lady who's who's making vinegar.
Oh, great.
Which is she's doing it with the SCOBY, etc. Because it's amazing how similar vinegar production is to making kombucha.
Yeah, it's very much the same process. And just a note on the brand that you use, SS Brewtech, that's a great brand for when you're starting out. I think they're one of the only brands that provide you with the full spectrum of everything you might need if you're starting for the first time. They're pricey, but they're also incredibly useful and scalable. And if you grow out of them, there'll be brewers that will want to buy stuff from you. So I wish that had existed when we started, or if it did, I'm not sure. I wish we'd known about it, because that would have been a great transition point for us. We jumped from 8 liters to 2,000 liters, which was crazy. And we spent a fortune on these tanks, which we then eventually sold back to Crate Brewery, and then had the same people that manufactured those tanks manufacture customized stainless steel tanks that were lower to the ground, squatter, and had just a better sort of height to surface ratio for kombucha fermentation.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. I mean, craft brewing is a great place to start from. Certainly, if you're starting out, craft brewing shops, some of the equipment they sell is fantastic. But there were, for us, there were issues in certain beer tanks are actually, they're too thin and they're too long, and there's definitely an advantage to have the squatter it is, the better.
Yeah, it means that the bacteria, which tends to sit on the surface of a brew, has less space to distribute itself throughout the liquid, which is what we found. And it's just easier to oxygenate if you're doing that manually, or if you're pumping it with like an aquarium pump or something. And I was going to say something around, so just to go off something you said around the pure aspect of brewing. When we first started, I was as well. We're only brewing in glass. We are never going to force carbonate. Those are the two things that I started out with. And then I quickly realized, well, we can't source glass for a reasonable price. We don't have the space for it. And then also doing a secondary fermentation without carbonation actually creates an alcoholic brew. There was no way of going around that. And that's something that I speak to a lot of brewers about. And a lot of people hold strong and fast to that. We only will naturally carbonate, we'll secondary ferment. We really like those champagne-like bubbles. have your kombucha tested. If you're doing that, it's going to be above 1% alcohol. And in this country and most Western countries, it needs to be at 0.5% or less to be classified as a non-alcoholic drink. So that's the sticking point. And really, you're not damaging the integrity of the brew by pumping it with CO2 versus having that, produced naturally. It does the same thing, and it's safer if you're creating a commercial product to carbonate it rather than secondary ferment.
Yeah.
That's just my feeling, though.
No, well, I completely agree with you. I mean, same thing. We were secondary fermenting, and we dropped it as part of being consistent. I could not make a brew consistent batch after batch when I was relying upon secondary fermentation. It was, the bubbles were different. Some would be very bubbly, some would be lighter. We prefer to have a light bubble kind of complexion, I guess is the way you describe it. And you just couldn't do it. And then also the alcohol side of things, I found it impossible to make a non-alcoholic brew that was secondary fermented, unless I was, you were somehow extracting the alcohol, which couldn't do as a small brewer, but I just said what to do. So I think when you extract the alcohol, it does change the taste. Secondary fermentation, you just can't control your alcohol.
Yeah, and commercially speaking, that's one of the most important things, that your brew is not contaminated with unwanted bacteria or yeast that could be detrimental to someone's health, and that it's non-alcoholic for legal reasons. And also, it depends on your perspective with kombucha or Jun. And for both of us, we're trying to provide a complex alcohol substitute for people who don't maybe feel like drinking or feel like supplementing their drinking or spacing it out with a drink, giving people a more, a range of choice when it comes to drinks. Which is, I think, what the goal is for a lot of people that brew kombucha.
Absolutely. So we've got another 10 minutes to go, I think. And so we got to sort of, unfortunately, there's so much to talk about. So we may have to have another episode with just you and I talking again. But a few questions that we can go into. Starting a new business is very daunting, and long hours, no pay, etc. Did you realize that would be the case? Did you hesitate before you went into starting the business? Were you overexcited, jumped in, and then regretted it once you realized the reality of starting your own business?
I didn't think at all about it. I booked a flight to London and I said, fuck it, we're going to do this. And, I didn't know if it would really work initially, but once we got some momentum, I was like, you know what? Like, this worked in California. I think it could work in London. Like, this idea of kombucha, we just got to get people excited about it. But I was working in a cafe 5 days a week while we started Jarr. And then maybe on the weekends, I was fermenting and kegging and doing different flavors. And so I was trying to balance a lot of things. But the biggest benefit for me was starting the brand with people that were my best friends and still are, and that had some form of brewing knowledge, and also building a business. For me, I was able to conceptually come up with what the brand would look like, how the product was made, that kind of thing, but then scaling, developing like a much bigger structure to the business, the finances, no idea about that. And thankfully, with my friends who ran Crate Brewery, they had built a brand. They knew about sourcing equipment. They knew about distribution. They knew about kegging. They knew about sourcing bottles. They, all these things that all the elements that you have to figure out yourself when you're doing it solo, they had that knowledge. So combined, we actually were like a really amazing team. My friend Tom is a real visionary, but he's also amazing with numbers. My friend Jess is a brewing expert. My friend Neil is great with the legal aspects. And so we all sort of came in from different perspectives and offered our own piece of the puzzle. And that's how Jarr was born. It wasn't one person. It was a team of people and a group effort to create a brand and a product that was scalable, that was, that we could sell, that tasted okay. So the biggest part of it was not doing it on my own, was doing it with people that I respected and that had experience that I didn't have. People that were smarter than me in many aspects. That's something GT Dave says in interviews that I've heard. He says the most successful thing that he ever learned was hire people that are smarter than you, work with people that are smarter than you. So you're constantly learning.
Yeah. And
how about you?
Well, it's a massive learning. I was going to say it's a massive learning curve when you're running your own business, because you do find yourself becoming a jack of all trades. Nunc was slightly different. Other business I've started by myself, and Nunc was originally my wife and I, and still is, but her business has taken off. She has consultancy, so she's doing more work on her consultancy side. So I find myself doing more Nunc by myself. That wasn't the initial plan, but that way. I wish I did have more people around me, definitely. And I would definitely recommend that if people are going to start this, they do try to do it with somebody else. And much like yourself, even if it means they have to work in the evenings or weekends, etc. Yeah, it's a long struggle, lots of learning, and I definitely recommend, if you can, do it with somebody else. Don't try to do it on your own.
It's easy, like, you know, after 6 years now actually at brewing, it's easy to forget all the difficulties. Yeah. Your brain, you know, the human brain has such an amazing, at times detrimental way of suppressing the negative things and thinking only of the positive. So all those difficult bits, I have a difficult time going back to, but certainly most of it was centered around production issues. And that's something maybe we can get into later is, you know, the different, you know, things that you might encounter, and different ways of minimizing the volatility, I guess you could say, of the kombucha ferment, which is very difficult to do.
I think you've clearly got, and it's one of the good things about what we're doing here is because we're both at different stages of the life cycle of a business, and we're going to be speaking to people who are at different stages as well, and that's great, because you're absolutely right. You forget about certain things. So talking about it now with people at different stages, we can actually say, oh, well, actually, so I'm going to say you've forgotten about the things like sales, and then, you know, equipment, canning, the HACCP form that you got to complete out for. Safety. So I think you've definitely forgotten lots of things that are, you know, aren't so much production side of things that, you know, you need to come to grips with. So I think that's one of the good things about us two being at different stages. We can actually, I can say, well, actually, there's also this. Don't forget that, etc. Exactly.
So there's so much to talk about with regards to starting a business financially. Like, how do you initially raise capital? What's the best way to do that? Taking investment, which we did in 2018, and scaling up to a different level that we weren't able to achieve on our own. The team, the sales strategy, distribution, you know, branding, which is something I'm very passionate about. Like starting not just a product, but starting a brand. Like, what does that entail? How do you develop a structure and a personality behind the product that you're making? How do you share that story with people? How do you set yourself apart? You know, that's I think an important aspect of it as well.
Yeah, and sales is one of the things I think you'd be great to talk to you more detail about as well, because end of the day, you know, I don't like sales, but I recognize that without sales, you don't have a business. So sales is probably the most important thing you can do as a business. So, and I think perhaps that's certainly from my experience, it's often underestimated just how important, how much focus it requires.
Yeah, I mean, I will confess that to this day, every single week, I guess buyers' email addresses and send personalized emails about Jarr. I mean, we're still doing that. I still do that to this day. It's not, you know, it's a never-ending struggle to try and grow your brand and get it in front of more people and buyers and find those email addresses. How do you do that? How do you get in touch with someone? LinkedIn. You know, that's a good way of starting.
No, and we were doing the exact same thing. And in fact, I think it was a couple of weeks ago where I sent an email, guessed their email address, sent them an email, and got a reply saying, well, actually, we stock X, I won't mention the brand, we stock XYZ's, you know, brand, we're good friends with them, sort of thing. And of course, I know them as well. So I'm there thinking, oh no, what if they go saying that so-and-so has been trying to, you know, post this? You know, it's not the case at all. But unfortunately, I think I found with kombucha, you know, where a shop or pub or bar, whatever, might stock, you know, 10 different types of beer. With kombucha, they'll go, we've already got one, we don't need another one. So it's still very much like considered a sort of a niche product. It's not, you know, raising awareness is obviously what we want to do to address it, but it is quite frustrating when you're going out to people to try to get your brand out there, doing the cold personalized emails, and then people say, no, I've already got one brand, I don't need another one.
That's a whole nother discussion, actually.
I know.
The sales strategy.
And unfortunately, I've got all these other questions for us to go through, but we've run out of time. So we have to keep it short.
We can catch up on them on the next episode.
Yeah, it's good. And we've also we're just sorting out times to interview people, etc. But hopefully the first episode will drop this week, and we'll drop them every week after that. And we'll definitely schedule one more in for us just to keep chatting.
Yeah, definitely. There's more to talk about here.
Adam, always a pleasure, never a chore. Look forward to catching up soon.
Yes, you too, man. Great to see you.
Cheers, matey.
All right. Bye-bye.